Working capital management. Let me say that. This refers to the management. This refers to the management of current assets and current liabilities. This refers to the management of current assets and current liabilities. This involves management of current assets and current liabilities. So now let's look at importance of working capital management. Importance of working capital management. Importance of working capital management. Number one, working capital represent a large proportion. Working capital represent a large proportion. Working capital represent a large proportion of the company's total investment. Working capital represent a large proportion of the company's total investment. Number two. Current assets are highly exposed to fraud. Current assets are highly exposed to fraud. Then number three, working capital items directly relate to the sales revenue. Directly relates to the sales revenue. And another one, it is important to manage working capital item. It is important to manage working capital item. Important to manage working capital items because management spend most of their time. Because management spends most of their time. Because management spends most of their time on routine decision making. Which involves current assets and current liability, which involve the current assets and current liabilities. Yeah, those are some of the importance of working capital management. So now let's look at working capital financing policies. So first of all, let me explain. And we have three types of working capital financing policy, or how we can finance our working capital. Yeah, you see, I think that working capital is current assets and current liability. That means working capital is the current asset minus current liability. So how can we finance the working capital item? So we have three financing policy. One is known as the aggressive policy. Number two, we have what we call the conservative policy. Then number three, we have what we call the matching policy. And what's the difference? Now, for aggressive policy, this is where the working capital items are financed using the short-term sources of finance. Then for conservative, this is where the working capital items are financed using the long-term sources of finance. And then for the matching, also known as the moderate policy. Now, in this case, current assets are classified into two. We have what we call the permanent current asset. And then we have what we call the seasonal or fluctuating current asset. So permanent or current asset, which might be in the company for more than 1 year. And then seasonal, they are those working capital that fluctuates above the optimal level. So under matching policy or moderate policy, this is where the permanent current asset will be financed using the long-term sources. And then for the seasonal or fluctuating current asset will be financed using the short-term sources. So that means aggressive short-term sources, conservative long-term sources, then matching is both the short-term and the long-term, where the permanent will be financed using the long-term and the seasonal current assets will be financed using the short-term. So we are looking at working capital financing policy. Number one, aggressive financing policy. Number one is aggressive financing policy. Aggressive financing policy. Let's see that. Under this policy, comma, working capital items will be financed. The working capital items will be financed. The working capital items will be financed using short-term sources of finance. The working capital will be financed using the short-term sources of finance. Short-term sources of finance. Full stop. Let me see that. Current assets of the company. Current assets of the company are classified into two. Current assets of the company are classified into two. Current assets of the company are classified into two, semicolon. A, permanent current asset. Permanent current asset. Permanent current asset. Then you explain that. Their current asset, which stays in the company. Their current asset, which stays in the company. Their current asset, which stays in the company for a period of more than 1 year. It stays in the company for a period of more than 1 year. It stays in the company for a period of more than 1 year. For a period of more than 1 year. Then B, we have seasonal stroke temporary, seasonal stroke temporary, stroke fluctuating, seasonal stroke temporary, stroke fluctuating current assets. You have to see that. These are current assets. These are current assets. These are current assets which fluctuates. These are current assets which fluctuates above the optimal level, which fluctuates above the optimal level, which fluctuates above the optimal level. Good. That was number one, aggressive policy. Number two, the another financing policy. Number two is conservative policy. Conservative financing policy. Conservative financing policy. Let me see that. Under this policy, comma, under this policy, comma, working item capital, working capital items, working capital items are financed using long-term sources of finance. Working capital items are financed using long-term sources of finance. Long-term sources of finance. And then lastly, number three is the matching policy stroke moderate policy. Matching policy stroke moderate financing policy. Let us see that. Under this financing policy, under this financing policy, comma, the permanent working capital items, permanent working capital items are financed using long-term sources of finance. Permanent working capital items are financed using the long-term sources of capital and the long-term sources of capital. While seasonal working capital are financed using short-term sources of finance, are financed using the short-term sources of finance, are financed using short-term sources of finance. November 2019, question 2B. Maua Horticultural Limited runs a flower export business. The company has two sources of funds at different interest rates. The finance cost for short-term funds is 20%, while the cost for the long-term funds is 25%. And these costs are expected to remain constant in the next 2 years. The following are the projected monthly working capital requirements for the company for the year ending that 1st of December 2020. We have the month of January to December, and then we have the working capital required. The average monthly permanent and seasonal working capital requirement for the company. The average monthly permanent and seasonal working capital. So how do we separate between the permanent and seasonal? So here you have the month. Then we have the working capital requirement. Then for the working capital requirement, you classify them into two, into permanent working capital and seasonal working capital. So the working capital requirement, here we have is 35. So here we have is 35. 52,500. 70. We have 105 and 57,500. We have 10. 42,500. 157,500. 87,500. We have 70 and we have 52,500. So now add the total working capital. Add the total working capital. Yes, 1275,000. Good. Now, how do we separate the working capital into permanent and seasonal? Now, to get the permanent working capital, now per month you look at the minimum working capital. And the minimum working capital we have is what? The minimum we have is 35. Add the total. Check that. Take that 5 times 12. You get 420. Then the difference between now the total working capital required and the permanent is what now will give us the seasonal or the fluctuating working capital. In this case, we'll take that 5 minus that 5, it is 0. That 5 minus that 5 is also 0. 52, 500 minus that 5, you get 17. 500, 70, that 5 you get 35. 105 minus 35, you get that 70, right? 157, you minus 35. That is 122, 500. This is 175,000. This is 207, 500. This is 122, 500. 52, 500. 70 minus 35, that is 35. They have 17,500. Now add the total. Add the total. It's very simple. Just take 1275. 1275 you minus 420. 855. Good. Now let's go to the required. Required. Number 1, the average monthly. We want monthly. The average monthly permanent and seasonal working capital requirement for the company. Number 1. So we need to get the average permanent monthly working capital and seasonal. We want monthly. So for the permanent, the total is 420. Then you divide by the number of months, which is 12, and you get 35,000. For the seasonal working capital, the total working capital requirement is 855. Then you divide by 12. So on average, how much do you need per month? Sorry? 71.50. Number 2 of the question. The total cost of working capital finance for the company under the aggressive financing policy, conservative financing policy, and matching financing policy. Number 1, it's under aggressive. Yeah, the person was under aggressive policy. Number 2 was under conservative policy. And then number 3 was under matching policy. Now we say that for aggressive financing policy, this is where all the working capital will be financed using the short-term sources of finance. The first paragraph, we are told that the finance cost for short-term sources of fund is 20%, while the cost of long-term funds is 25%. So you'll take 20% of the total working capital, which is 1275. Then for conservative, you'll take long-term sources of finance, of which is 25% of the total working capital, which is 1275. Give me that. This is 255,000. 318, 750. And then for matching, the permanent working capital will be financed using the long-term source of finance. And then for the seasonal, working capital will be financed using the short-term source of finance. So for permanent, you use the long-term source of finance, of which long-term is 25% of the permanent working capital, which is 420. Then for seasonal working capital or fluctuating working capital, use the short-term sources of finance, which is 20%, and the total seasonal was 855. What do you get? Sorry? 94. 420, that is 210. 210 divided by 2, 105. Sorry, 170? 171. Now we add the 2. Number 3 of the question. Advise the company on the appropriate working capital financing policy. So in this case, when you're advising, remember this one is the cost of finance. In short, it's like the interest. So you take the one with the least cost. Now, which one has the least cost? So use aggressive financing policy. Good. Can copy. The open November 2020, question 2B. Now, to be told that Deru Suppliers Limited is reviewing its working capital commitment for enhanced efficiency. The following information related to the period ended that 1st of March 2020 is provided below. So you have the turnover for the year. Now, turnover means the sales, which was 15 million. Then we have cost as percentage of sales. So we need to get those costs. Let's do that. Cost as percentage of sales. So we have direct material. So that direct material cost. Those 30% of sales. So it's of 15 million. Then we have direct labor. So direct labor cost as percentage of sales is 25%. So we take 25% of 15 million. Then we have the variable overheads. Variable overhead is 10% of the sales. Then we have fixed overhead. And for the fixed overhead, it's at 15% of the sales. And then we have selling and distribution. Selling and distribution is at 5% of the sales. So now give me that. This is 4.5. I have that 750. We have 1.5. 15 plus 750 is that 2250. And here we have 750. Good. Additional information. On average, account receivable takes 2.5 months before payment. Raw material and inventory are for 3 months. Inventory for 3 months. Work in progress represent a 2-month worth of half processed goods. Finished goods represent 1 month production. Credit is taken as follows. So credit gives rise to creditors, which is a liability. Number 3, work in progress and finished good are valued on material, labor, and variable expenses cost. Labor force is paid for 50 working weeks a year required. Assess the working capital requirement for the company. You assess the working capital requirement. So working capital is the current asset minus current liability. So we determine the current asset required. And for the current assets required, note number 1. On average, account receivable take 2.5 months before payment. Account receivable. Now, account receivable is the same as debtors. Now, what gives rise to debtors? Now, what gives rise to debtor is on the credit sales. And we are given there the turnover for the year. So the annual turnover, the sales is 15 million. This is per annum. And then you're told that number 1, account receivable take 2.5. So take 2.5 months over 12 because this was the annual. So on average, how much do we have? Those data arise as a result of credit sales. Get that 125,000. Then raw material are inventory for 3 months. Raw material. Now here we have the direct material cost. Now direct material cost, it's 4.5 per annum. And then we are told that raw material are inventory for 3 months. So take 3/12. What do you get? What are you getting? That's 7? That's 750. It can't be. That's a quarter of 4.5 million. Sorry? Hey, what are you getting? 1125. Good. Then work in progress represent 2 months worth of half processed good. Work in progress. They represent 2 months worth of half processed good. Now let's go to note number 3. Note number 3 that the work in progress and finished good are valued on material, labor, and variable expenses. So we need work in progress. You're told that the work in progress is valued on material, labor, and variable expenses. So material cost was 4.5. Labor, we have is that 750. And then variable overhead is 1.5. And we are told that in note number 1, that work in progress represents 2 months worth of half processed goods. So you take half, so it's 50%. And then it's 2 months worth of half processed goods. So 2/12, 2/12, 2/12. It is 75,000. It is 12,500. Or 25,000 goods. Then the last bullet of note number 1 is that finished good represent 1 month production. So finished goods. And you are told that in note number 3 that work in progress and finished goods are valued on material, labor, and variable expenses. So we have on material, the labor, and on variable overhead. Material cost was 4.5. Labor was 3750. Variable is 1.5. And we are told that finished good represent a 1 month production. So it's 1/12, 1/12, 1/12, half. So you get 375, 312,500. Are you getting that? Then we are told that number 2, credit is taken as follows. Credit gives rise to creditors. So first of all, give me the total current asset. Add the total current assets. Correct? 4370, 500. Now you go to the current liability, creditors. Now you are told that credit is taken as follows. You have on direct material. Then you have on direct labor. Then you have variable overhead. Then we have on fixed overhead. Then we have selling and distribution. Now for direct material, the amount was 4.5. This was that 750. We have it 1.5. We have it 2250. We have 750. So credit is taken as follows. For direct material is 2 months. It's 2/12. Direct labor is 1 week. So it's 1, but that is 1 week, not number 4. Labor force is paid for 50 working weeks in a year. So you have 50 weeks in a year. And then variable overhead is 1 month. So it's 1/12. Then fixed overhead, 1 month, 1/12. Now selling and distribution is half a month. So 0.5/12. You good? $750,000. $75,000. And 25,000. That 1 to 50. 187,500. So now let's add the total. You got 11? 1168? 7. Yes. The current assets on. Yes. The answer is different. You're getting how much? 50? 5875. Good. So now let's get the working capital. So the working capital requirement, you take the current assets, which is 5875. You minus the current liability, which is 1168, 750. So how much the working capital requirement? Sorry? 47? Yes. 250. Good. Yeah, so that's how we get the working capital requirement. So you can copy. That's another illustration. The board of directors of Rand Mill Limited have requested you to prepare a statement showing the working capital requirement for a level of activity of 30,000 units of output for the year. So annual output, it's 30,000. We can also convert this one into month, so that we get the monthly output. So to get the monthly output, you take 30,000, you divide by 12. What do you get? You get 25? 2,500 units. So this annual output, this is a monthly output. Better that the board of directors of Rand Mill Limited have requested you to prepare a statement showing the working capital requirement for a level of activity of 30,000 units of output for the year. The cost structure of the production of the company's product for the above mentioned activity level is given as follows. So we have the cost per unit. So need to get the raw material, and I want us to compute per month. So raw material cost. Then we have direct labor. Then we have overhead. And then we can also get the sales. Now, raw material cost per unit is 200. That's per unit. Then you multiply by the monthly production, which is 25, so that you get the total monthly cost. Or alternatively, you can take 200, you multiply by 30,000, you get the annual raw material cost. For direct labor, the cost per unit is 50. Then you multiply by the number of units per month, so that you get the total monthly cost. Overhead is 150. You multiply by 25. Then to get the sales. Now, what gives rise to sales? We want to determine the data. So for the sales, we have the selling price. Now, the selling price is 500 per unit, and per month, the production is 2,500. So how much is the total raw material cost? Get 500,000 per month. Is it 125? 125. This is 375. What about the sales? Yes? 1,250. 1,250,000. Additional information. Past experience indicates that raw material are held in stock on average of 2 months. Then number 2, work in progress, 100% complete in regard to material and 50% for labor and overhead will be half of month production. And then finished goods are in stock on average of 1 month. Credit out to supply is 1 month. Credit out to debtors is 2 months. Then a minimum cash balance of 250,000 is expected to be maintained. Required. Prepare a statement of working capital requirement. Working capital is current asset minus current liability. So now let's get the current assets. For the current asset, that note number 1. Past experience indicates that raw materials are held in stock on average of 2 months. So raw material cost per month, it's 500. That's per month. So that they're in inventory, they are in stock for 2 months, on average of 2 months. So you multiply by 2, and that one you get 1 million. Number 2, work in progress. So you need the work in progress. Work in progress, 100% complete in regard to material, and 50% for labor and overhead. Labor and overhead. So raw material cost is 500,000. Labor, it's 125,000. Overhead we have is 375,000. Then you multiply by work in progress, 100% in regard to the raw material, and 50% for labor and overhead. This is 100%. This is 50%. 50% will be half month production. Will be half month. Remember, these are the monthly costs. So if it will be half a month, you divide by a half. So what do you get? So this one you get is 250. 125 times 0.5 times 0.5, what do you get? Sorry? Hey, kindly can you be audible so that I can hear what you're saying? Yeah? That 1 to 50. $93,750. Then number 3, finished good are in stock on average for 1 month. Finished good. So finished good. So the work in progress will be also the element of the finished good. We have the material. We have labor. Then we have overhead. For material was an amount of 500,000. We have 125. We have 375. So I told that finished goods are in stock on average for 1 month. So you multiply by 1. 500. 125. Then we have 375. Number 5. Credit allowed to debtors is 2 months. So we have debtors. Debtor is a current asset. And debtor, what gives rise to debtor is credit sales. And we had the sales. So the sales was an amount of 1250. That's per month. And we are told that credit allowed to debtors is 2 months. So you multiply by 2. You will get 2.5 million. And then number 6, a minimum cash balance of 250 is expected to be maintained. Cash is part of current assets. They expect to maintain a minimum of 250,000. Now give me the total current assets. $42.87 per 1. Then we determine the current liability. Now for the current liability, we are told that in note number 4, credit allowed to supplier is 1 month. Credit allowed to supplier. Now, if you look at this element we have, now what gives rise to the supply from the creditors? Supplier. So we have the raw material. So the raw material we have it's 500,000. And then we are told that Credit allowed to supplier is 1 month. So you multiply by 1 to get 500. So therefore, to get the working capital is current asset minus the current liability. So the current asset we have is 42,87,500. You minus the current liability of 500. So how much the working capital requirement? That's 787,500. Good. So you can copy. Sorry? Labor does not give rise to supplier. We don't supply labor. Labor gives rise to what? Accrual in case we have not yet paid. So if you look at this element, you are told that the credit allowed to supplier. Supplier is the one who supplied the material. We don't supply labor. Labor is internally. So labor does not give rise to creditors. So in case it was a creditor, that means could be accrual, but you're not told accrual. Told that credit allowed to supplier. So the supplier it's only for the raw material. Direct labor is an internal cost. An internal cost is not a creditor. Overhead is an internal cost, therefore does not give credit, it gives rise to overhead. So the only supply, what you can only be supplied is only for the raw material. Now let's look at factors affecting the selection of a financing policy. Factors affecting selection of a financing policy. Factors affecting the selection of a financing policy. Number one is the cost of finance. Number one is the cost of finance. Number two, availability of the fund at the time of investment. Availability of funds at the time of investment. Availability of funds at the time of investment. Number three, terms and conditions of borrowing. Terms and conditions of borrowing. Terms and conditions of borrowing. Another one, borrowing capacity of the company. The borrowing capacity of the company. Another one, management attitude towards the risk. Management attitude towards the risk. Management attitude towards the risk. Yeah, those are the factors that affect the financing policy. Good. Now let's look at what we call overcapitalization. Overcapitalization. Overcapitalization, where to say that? A company is said to be overcapitalized. A company is said to be overcapitalized if the working capital are in excess of its need. A company is said to be overcapitalized. A company is said to be overcapitalized if its working capital is in excess of its need. If its working capital is in excess of its needs. If the working capital is in excess of its need. Good. Now, also look at what we call overtrading. Overtrading. I have to say that. This occurs when the company is growing too fast. This occurs when the company is growing too fast. This occurs when the company is growing too fast and trying to carry on large volume of activities and trying to carry on large volume of activities and trying to carry on a large volume of activity with its low level of capital, with its low level of capital, with its low level of capital, with its low level of capital. I say that this occurs when the company is growing too fast and trying to carry on a large volume of activities with its low level of capital, full stop. Although the company may be making high profits, although the company may be making high profits, comma, it's likely to run into a serious liquidation problem, a liquidity problem. It's likely to run into serious liquidity problem. Likely to run into liquidity problem because it does not have enough capital. Because it does not have enough capital for its short-term financial obligation. Because it doesn't have enough capital for its short-term financial obligation. Doesn't have enough capital for its short-term financial obligation. Full stop. Now let's look at indicators of overtrading. Indicators of overtrading. Indicators of overtrading. How can you know that the company is overtrading? Indicators of overtrading. Number one, liquidity deficit, liquidity deficit, liquidity deficit. Number two, a decline in current ratio and quick ratio. A decline in current ratio and quick ratio. A decline in current ratio and quick ratio. Another one, high increase in inventory level. High increase in inventory level. High increase in inventory level. Another one, high increase in the volume of current assets. High increase in volumes of current assets. Another one, increase in turnover ratios. Increase in turnover ratios. Increase in turnover ratios. Increase in turnover ratios. Good. Now that's the difference between overcapitalization and overtrading. Now, overcapitalization is you're saying that it's all about having excess working capital than what you need. Yeah, assuming you have a new shop, and then you're just stocking. So whenever you get the cash, you put more stock. But if you look at the relationship between the stock and the sales, they are not directly correlated. Yeah, if you have a new shop, first of all, start with small stock so that first of all, you run your customer. But in this case, you spend all your money in putting stock. Another thing is when you sell. When you're selling, mostly you are selling on credit. So what will happen? That means you'll have more debtors. Sometimes it's good to trade on cash because if you have more debtors, that means most of your customers are buying on credit. High chances you are going to go into financial crisis. How will you pay rent if you're selling just on credit? How will you pay your suppliers? You're selling all the goods on credit. Yeah, that's what we call overcapitalization. Then overtrading is where the company is growing too fast. You know, when you are increasing, that means you are making a lot of sales, but the capital is all about the asset base. The asset base is not increasing. And that's why you see that whenever the company makes a profit, you expect the asset base to increase. Open new branch, buy new equipment to enhance production. Okay, in this case, when the sales is going to increase, that means you are growing too fast, but the asset base is not increasing. It's remaining to be constant. That's what we call now overtrading. Good. Now, remember, you're looking at the working capital. They say that working capital is the management of the current assets and current liability. So I want us to look at now specific items. We look at how do we manage cash? That's the cash management. Also, how do we manage our creditors? Not our creditor, but debtors. So we look at debtors management. We also look at inventory management. We'll mostly be focusing on the current asset. Now let's start with the cash management. Subtopic, cash management. Cash management. Let us see that. There are two models of cash management. There are two models of cash management. A, Baumol. Cash management model. Then number two, we have Mira and Oz. Cash management model. Those are the two models of managing cash in a company. Yeah, there are some of the policies that try to dictate how much the company cash should hold and how much that whenever it reaches a given point, they need to be banked. Because holding a lot of cash in a company, it increases the risk of fraud. Good. So now let's start with number A, Baumol's cash management model. Baumol's cash management model. Right to say that? This model was developed. This model was developed. This model was developed out of economic order quantity, out of economic order quantity. This model was developed out of the economic order quantity of inventory control, out of the economic order quantity, out of the economic order quantity of inventory control. Also, it's evaluated as follows. Evaluated as follows. Evaluated as follows. To get C is 2ft, you divide by k, then you get the square root, where what is C, what is f, what is t, what is k. Where C is the optimal cash balance, F is the fixed transaction cost, then T is the total cash required for the year. Total cash requirement for the year. And then K is the transaction of the interest cost. The interest cost or the opportunity cost. I can call it not interest cost, but interest rate. Interest rate. Then how do we get the number of transfer? Now the number of transfer, you take T over C. Yeah. Now under inventory, it will come to evaluate about the inventory. The number of transfer is what we call the number of annual order. So when I talk about the number of transfer, how many times in a year should you be banking your money? Then we have to say that the total cost of maintaining cash balance, the total cost of maintaining cash balance, the total cost of maintaining cash balance will be determined as follows, will be determined as follows, will be determined as follows. So how do we get the ordering cost? The T over C, F. And then how do we get the holding cost? To get the holding cost is CK over 2. November 2017, question 5D. Yes? Yeah, this is T over C, then you multiply by F, like this. T over C, then you multiply by F. Yeah, you open November 2017, question 5D. Question 5D, I told that. Testaka Limited estimate that it requires 12 million for its operation during the year. That's what we call the T. So that T is the total cash requirement for the year. So it estimates that it requires 12 million for the year. The company will sell marketable security and deposit into a cost-free, no-interest bank account. The marketable security currently provides an interest yield of 5% per year. That's K. K is 5%. So that K is the interest rate. The cost of selling the marketable security is 60 per transaction, regardless of the size of the transaction. That's F. Remember, you see that F is the fixed transaction cost. Fixed, that means regardless of the size, it won't change. That's why it's fixed. That the cost of selling the marketable security is 60 shillings per transaction, regardless of the size of the transaction. Assume a 365-day financial year required. Using the Baumol's cash management model, determine, number one, the optimal size of transaction for selling the marketable security. So number one is the optimal cash. That's C. So that C is the optimal cash, of which is equals to 2 FT over K, then you get the square root. So it will be 2. Fixed transaction cost is 60. T, the total cash requirement is 12 million. All of it you divide by K, which is 5%, 0.05, and then you get the square root. $169. 70. Yeah, let's work with 169,746. Then number two, the frequency which the security should be sold. Frequency, how frequently should we sell? So to get the frequency, first of all, you need to get the number of transfer or the number of banking times. Or you will take, you see that to get the number of transfer, you take the total cash required over the optimal cash balance. Now, what does it mean? Now, let me explain in layman's language what it means. Now, if the company in the year, they need 12 million. Now, every time they'll be drawing the money or banking the money, they'll be dealing with batches of 169, 706, 169, 706, like that. So you want to determine in 1 year, how many times will we bank or how many times will we withdraw from the bank if you're withdrawing in batches of 169, 706. So we take the total cash required, which is 12 million, and then the optimal cash balance, we are dealing with batches of 169, 706. So it will be how many times? That's what we call the number of transfers. It's 71 transfers. That's the number of times you should visit the bank, maybe to deposit the money. But now the question was, how frequently? How frequently? If in 1 year we are making 71 transfers, and you are told that, assume that 1 year has 365 days. So therefore, to get 365, and in this 1 year, we'll be making 71 transfers. So that means how frequently? That means after how many days? Yeah, 5 days. 5 days. Then before you copy, let's do the last one. May 2015, question 2B. May 2015, question 2B. Moen Limited is in the process of determining its optimal cash level it should hold in the next financial year, 2015-2016. The finance department has established that the annual cash requirement for the company is 2,500 million. That's T. The total cash requirement is 2,500 million. Yeah, that's 2.5 billion. The fixed cost of selling the security trades cash per transaction is 500. That's F. The fixed transaction cost is 500. The opportunity cost of holding the cash is 12%. So that's K. K is 12%. Yeah, you see that K is the interest rate or the opportunity cost, which is 12%. Required. Using the Baumol's model of cash management, determine, number one, the optimal cash balance for the company should hold. How much would it hold every time? So C, you see that is 2 FT over K, then you get the square root. So it will be 2. Fixed transaction cost is 500. T is 2.5 billion. All of it you divide by K. K is 12%, 0.12. And then you get the square root. What do you get? Sorry? 355. Good. And then number 2, the total cost of maintaining the cash balance. Total cost. Now, to get the total cost, you'll take the holding cost plus the ordering cost. How do you get that? So there is a formula. So to get the ordering cost, first you get the number of order or the number of transfers. And how do you get the number of transfers? T over C. To get the ordering cost, first of all, you take the number of transfer of the number of order, T over C. Once you get the number of order, then you multiply by the transaction cost per order. That's F, the fixed transaction cost. Then, how do we get the holding cost? Now, holding cost, we see that at every time, we'll be holding cash. These are optimal cash balance. You'll be holding an amount of 45.64. That's our, so you take first of all, total. Then you multiply by K, the opportunity cost of holding that cash. You know what's the opportunity cost? The benefit foregone for not investing that fund, and then you get the average. So let's start with the ordering cost. T is 2.5 billion. Then you divide by the optimal cash, of which every time we'll be having an amount of 45.64, 355, so that you get the number of transfer times the transaction cost for each transfer, which is 500. Then here we take C. C is what we have computed here, which is 45.64, 355. You multiply by K. K was 12%. That's the opportunity cost. And then you get the average. In most cases, are always equal. How do you get? 273. 861. About this. The same. Yeah, that's what I was saying, that in most cases, they're always the same. So multiply by 2, so that now we get the total cost. You get 540. 54. Good. So in our next session, we will start with the other model. That's the Miller and All's cash management model. Now, next session, I won't dictate. So next session, I'll just be doing the question. So I had shared the notes with you. So make sure you print that. You can print, but if you have the time to copy, you can copy the remaining, because we have done almost half of what I had shared on working capital management. So next class, I won't dictate. We'll just be discussing what you have. So make sure you have the notes in advance.